Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we take stacks of knowledge articles, research, history, philosophy, and distill them into the most potent intellectual fuel available, custom-tailored for you.
Our mission today is, well, it's a big one. We're going deep into the heart of the Islamic Golden Age to decode a figure whose reach across disciplines is almost unimaginable by modern standards.
We're talking about Abu Ali Asin bin Abdullah bin Sina.
Known in the Latin West, of course, as Avicenna. And to his contemporaries, he wasn't just a scholar, he was al-Sheikh al-Rais.
Which means the leading master.
The leading master, exactly. And he earned it.
When you look at his lifespan, roughly 980 to 1037, you realize this man lived fast and he lived intensely. Avicenna wasn't just a polymath. He was arguably the greatest polymath of that entire era.
Think about the roles he juggled. I mean, it's staggering. He was a world-class philosopher, a revolutionary physician, a respected astronomer.
And at the same time, a high-level political administrator, often a vizier in some extremely unstable courts.
The sheer surviving output is probably the clearest measure of his relentless intellectual drive. It's believed he wrote close to 450 works.
450.
And we're certain enough to still possess nearly 240 of them today. And look at where he placed his focus. 150 of those surviving texts are purely on philosophy. Another 40 are foundational texts on medicine.
And these are not just dusty academic curiosities, are they? These were foundational documents that genuinely shaped subsequent human history.
Absolutely. His work became this seminal force, deeply influencing not only the entire Islamic world's intellectual tradition, but it also permeated medieval European medical thought. And it really set the stage for the entire structure of scholastic philosophy.
So to really appreciate this, we have to understand the environment he was in.
We do. Avicenna was operating during the absolute peak of the Islamic Golden Age, a time of unprecedented intellectual vigor under the Samanid and Umayyad dynasties in Persia and Central Asia.
Right, and this region was basically the world's intellectual clearinghouse. Why was that?
Well, because rulers sponsored these massive translation projects. It was an incredible transmission of knowledge from Greek, Roman, Persian, and Indian sources.
So he wasn't creating in a vacuum. He was immersed in a library containing the accumulated knowledge of antiquity.
All of it. Specifically the highly complex Greco-Roman, Neoplatonic, and Aristotelian works that have been translated and studied, particularly by the foundational Kindi school of philosophers.
They translated the giants.
And Avicenna built the next theoretical skyscraper right on top of their foundations. So our mission today is to take your sources and go beyond the standard biography. We're zeroing in on the specific revolutionary ideas of profound insight that truly earned him that honorific.
The al-Sheikh al-Rais.
Exactly. What did he say specifically in his metaphysics and in his scientific method that just shifted the entire intellectual landscape and ensured his legacy would endure for centuries?
To begin, we really have to look at the volatility of his personal life. It's a wild story, and it profoundly shaped his intellectual search for stability.
It really did. Avicenna was born around 980 in a village called Afshana in Transoxiana, very close to Bukhara, which was the Samanid capital at the time.
And he came from a highly educated, wealthy Persian family.
That background provided crucial early access. His father was a native of Balkh who served as a Samanid official, which meant young Avicenna grew up around administrative life and had, basically unlimited access to scholarly texts.
And that access allowed his prodigious nature to flourish very early on.
Prodigy is an understatement. The sources tell us he had memorized the entire Quran by the time he was 10 years old.
10?
But his true foundation came from a fierce self-education in Greek learning. He was a ferocious autodidact, just pulling from the absolute best texts available at the time. By 18, he wasn't just familiar, he was versed in the Greek sciences.
We're talking about mastering monumental works like Ptolemy's Almagest on astronomy.
And Euclid's Elements on geometry. And while he did study Islamic jurisprudence fiqh with the Hanafi jurist Ismail al-Zahid, and he worked closely with the physician and philosopher al-Natili, it's clear that his vast synthesis of knowledge came from his own tireless intellectual drive.
I find his religious alignment pretty interesting, especially given the political context of the time.
How so?
Well, both his father and his brother had converted to Ismailism, which was a politically active and very influential Shia branch back then.
Right.
Yet Avicenna himself, despite their, missionary attempts, he remained firmly with the Hanafi Sunni school of thought, which was the prevailing orthodoxy of the Samanids he initially served.
That decision really reflects the start of his tightrope walk between intellectual independence and political necessity. His academic background quickly translated into political roles, but the environment, it was just crumbling around him.
And this is where his life turns from quiet academic study into a high-stakes narrative of survival. His biography is less a linear timeline and more like a map of forced migration.
A map of relentless political instability. That's a great way to put it. His career started with immense promise. By 17, he was already the physician to the Samanid ruler Nu II. He was at the top.
But then catastrophe.
In 999, the Karakhanate Khanate captured Bukhara, and the Samanid Empire collapsed, just completely. And because Avicenna had been so close to that fallen regime, his high position immediately made him a political target.
He had to become a fugitive.
And so began this decade of movement: Bukhara, Gurganj, Gorgan, Ray, Hamadan, and finally Isfahan. He went from being in this established center of learning to constantly seeking new patrons just to survive.
And his first refuge was Gurganj?
Yes, under the Mamunid rulers, which was itself an incredible center of learning. He was there debating philosophical and scientific points with contemporaries like the legendary scientist al-Biruni.
Wow.
But even that sanctuary was temporary. He had to flee again around 1012, moving westward through Khorasan. He was aiming for the relative safety of the court of Qaboos, only to arrive and find out Qaboos had just died.
It sounds absolutely exhausting. This constant forced travel must have made it dramatically more difficult to produce the vast, systematic works that we know him for.
It must have. And it also explains why he constantly leveraged his medical skills to gain safety and patronage.
He was a court physician who was often, it seems, forced into these administrative roles.
He was. He eventually settled briefly in Ray, where he treated the Bayid Emir Maj al-Dawla for a case of severe melancholia. His medical success earned him trust, and he was soon serving as a high-level administrator, even as a sort of business manager, for the powerful regent Sayyida Shirin.
Okay, let's unpack this shift into high-level administration. The period in Hamadan, around 1015, where he served Shams al-Dawla, that really seems to define this dual role and led to maximum risk for him.
Oh, yes. And it also involved intense intellectual rivalry. The intellectual climate was fierce. Upon his arrival in Hamadan, he was expected to defend his philosophical positions in public.
Which brought him into a heated debate with a man named Abu Qasim al-Kirmani,
A leading member of the Baghdad school.
Can you just briefly clarify the significance of that rivalry, the Baghdad school versus what Avicenna was doing?
Certainly. The Baghdad school represented the older, more orthodox, and often more conservative reading of Aristotle's texts. Geographically, they were centered closer to the Abbasid Caliphate. Avicenna, however, was part of a burgeoning philosophical tradition we call Eastern Peripateticism.
So he was a new thinker, a radical.
To them, he was. His synthesis, which incorporated Neoplatonic emanations and his own specific critiques of Aristotle, was seen by some of the more traditional Baghdad scholars as dangerously innovative, maybe even heretical.
And so the debate with al-Kirmani became personal and political.
It did. Avicenna accused al-Kirmani of poor logic. The counterattack was brutal. Avicenna faced accusations so serious that he had to demand an official investigation.
And the most explosive charge?
That he was mimicking the stylistic structure of the Quran, specifically in his sermons on divine unity. In that culture, that was a charge bordering on apostasy or blasphemy. It was incredibly dangerous.
That kind of friction led directly to his downfall in that court. He ended up serving Shams al-Dawla as vizier, but when the ruler died in 1021, Avicenna was completely exposed.
The court suspected him of treacherous correspondence with a rival, Ala al-Dawla Muhammad, the ruler of Isfahan. This led to his swift arrest and imprisonment in the fortress of Fardajan.
And he was there for 4 months.
4 months.
I want to pause on this because it provides such a profound psychological context for his philosophical work. Here's a man whose entire physical reality was defined by contingency. His home, his safety, his political position, all temporary.
Right.
Did this relentless instability inform his intellectual drive?
I believe it absolutely did. We'll get into his metaphysics shortly, but his entire system centers on distinguishing between contingent existence, the world of politics, life, and matter that is constantly falling apart, and necessary existence, which is the stable, uncaused, eternal entity.
So it's no accident.
It's no accident that a man whose life was the epitome of worldly contingency dedicated his greatest intellectual power to finding the logically necessary foundation that simply cannot not exist.
That connection is just so powerful, and it's during his time of flight and imprisonment that he finished some of his most profound works, including the Book of Healing. The sources say he was writing 50 pages a day while in hiding.
Unbelievable productivity under that kind of duress.
Yeah.
After his release, he finally found his most stable period under al-Dawla in Isfahan, where he served as an advisor for the last 14 years of his life.
And that stability was crucial.
It was crucial for organizing and completing his monumental philosophical and scientific encyclopedias.
Unfortunately, that period ended while he was accompanying al-Dawla on a military expedition in 1037. Avicenna, who had long suffered from severe colic, succumbed to the illness and died in Hamadan, the same city that had once imprisoned him.
But where he was ultimately buried, his life was split exactly between the quiet certainty of philosophy and the brutal, uncertain realities of court politics.
So while his political life was defined by chaos, his impact on the medical world was the exact opposite: monolithic and enduring. He's rightly called the father of early modern medicine.
He is. And his name is instantly synonymous with the Canon of Medicine, or Al-Canon Philib.
This 5-volume encyclopedia, which he largely completed during his most turbulent years in Ray and Hamadan, is perhaps the most historically significant medical text ever written.
The word endurance doesn't do it justice. The canon wasn't just popular. It was the definitive medical authority, not just in the Islamic world, but across Europe as well.
Can you imagine a textbook dominating a technical field for 7 centuries?
It's almost impossible to conceive of. It remained in active use at prestigious European universities like Montpellier and Leuven as late as 1650.
1650, that degree of longevity demands analysis. Why? Why did it last so long? Was it just a great summary of Hippocrates and Galen?
No, not at all. It was a masterful, systematic synthesis combined with revolutionary clinical insights and a truly modern structure.
So the organization itself was a breakthrough.
A huge one. The canon is divided into 5 books. The first deals with general medical principles and anatomy. The second on simple drugs, or materia medica. The third covers specific diseases of individual organs, organized head to toe.
Which is so logical.
Incredibly logical for teaching. The fourth book covers systemic diseases, fevers, and venoms. And the fifth is a formulary for compound drugs and pharmacology. That systematic organization alone would have been a game changer for teaching.
But the content goes deeper. What are some of those revolutionary clinical insights that truly anticipated modern thought?
Okay, here's a powerful nugget that illustrates his intellectual leap into public health. Avicenna was operating centuries before germ theory was even a concept.
Right.
Yet he postulated that certain diseases were associated with invisible, tainted organisms in the air or water.
Wow.
And based on this rational hypothesis, he explicitly recommended isolating ill individuals, a practice of quarantine, to reduce the transmission of disease to others.
That is a staggering leap from the traditional four humors theory, which had governed medical thought for over a millennium. He's moving from metaphysical speculation to a rational public health intervention.
It speaks to his deep commitment to causality. He applied this same rigor to the mechanics of disease. In his medical philosophy, Avicenna insisted that all medical phenomena must have discernible causes. He laid this out in works like Liber Primus Naturalium.
Can you give us an example of how he used that search for causality in his work?
He used specific anomalies, like polydactyly, the condition of being born with extra fingers or toes, to illustrate his point. He didn't just note that some people are born with extra digits. He insisted that this seemingly rare event must have a physical, causal reason.
It's not just a random act of God, in his view.
Exactly. It must have a cause, likely originating from changes in the seed or the material composition. This view, which demanded a systematic physical explanation for all disorders, even congenital ones, truly laid the groundwork for the modern investigative approach to medicine.
That relentless insistence on causal reasons for all observable phenomena is what we associate with the Enlightenment, yet he was championing it centuries earlier.
And this commitment to empiricism also translated into early forms of clinical trials. Avicenna provided precise rules for testing the efficacy of a new drug.
Rules like what?
For instance, requiring that the disease be natural and not coincidental, ensuring the drug's effects are constant across many trials, and testing the drug on the body's essential structure, like the heart, before testing on secondary symptoms. It sounds almost like a modern drug testing protocol.
It really does. And this systematic approach also extended to practical chemistry. He was deeply engaged in chemical processes, but always focused on practical utility, not speculative alchemy.
That is the key distinction. While he was highly critical of the grand claims of transmutation turning base metals into gold, His contributions to chemical engineering and pharmacy were revolutionary.
He's documented as the first person known to successfully derive the attar of flowers using distillation, right?
He is an incredibly pure and concentrated essence. And he didn't stop at making perfumes. He applied that technical innovation directly to medicine.
How so?
He pioneered the specific use of steam distillation to produce essential oils like rose essence, and immediately incorporated them into his vast pharmacopoeia. These weren't just pleasant scents. He used these highly refined essential oils as aromatherapeutic treatments for various ailments, including certain heart conditions.
So there's a clear link between innovative chemistry and medical practice.
A direct one. And I think we need to contrast that practical genius with his chemical skepticism one more time, because it highlights his scientific integrity.
Go on.
While he was pioneering distillation methods still recognizable today, he was also the ultimate skeptic regarding the popular belief in alchemy. He definitively disputed the theory of transmutation.
He just didn't buy it.
He flat out denied it, stating clearly in his work, quote, "No change can be effected in the different species of substances, though they can produce the appearance of such change." He recognized that alchemists could create illusions of gold, like plating or coloring, but he denied the possibility of fundamentally changing one element into another at its core.
He refused to let speculative theory override empirical observation.
Always.
Moving from the certainty of clinical observation to the abstract world of pure reason, we find the philosophical core of Avicenna's identity. His system is rooted in the peripatetic school Aristotelianism, but he was not simply echoing the Greeks.
Not at all. He insisted on the principle of ijtihad, or critical independent reasoning.
So his philosophy wasn't a static commentary, it was a dynamic, evolving system.
It was. He took Aristotelian logic and integrated it seamlessly with Neoplatonic concepts, particularly the scheme of emanations, which explains how all creation flows forth from the One. This synthesis, what we call Avicennism, became so dominant that it was foundational to Kalam, or Islamic rational theology, throughout the 12th century.
So he was effectively providing the intellectual machinery for reconciling faith and reason.
That's a perfect way to describe it. And that influence wasn't geographically contained. The transmission of his ideas to Europe, particularly through the partial Latin translation of the Book of Healing, known as Sufficientia, created a strong intellectual current called Latin Avicennism.
And the depth of that influence is hard to overstate.
It is. Even though the more radical elements of his philosophy were later banned by Parisian decrees in the 13th century, his core ideas had already provided the conceptual tools for Western scholasticism. Central figures like William of Auvergne and, most famously, Thomas Aquinas relied heavily on Avicenna's precise distinction of metaphysical concepts to build their own systems.
So Aquinas was using Avicenna's toolkit.
He was essentially using Avicenna's categories of being to structure his own theology.
To understand that massive influence, we have to tackle his metaphysics. This is the intellectual bedrock. He initiated a full-fledged, rigorous inquiry into the very concept of being.
And he achieved a definitive, clear distinction between essence, what a thing is, and existence, wujud, that it is.
This might sound simple, but it was profoundly groundbreaking.
It really was. Prior thinkers, including Aristotle, often treated essence and existence as inseparable properties of a thing. Avicenna broke this link. He argued that the essence of something, say, the definition of human or house, can exist perfectly in the mind without guaranteeing its reality in the external world.
So the definition of a house is a concept, but the actual existence of a specific house has to be accounted for externally.
Precisely. Since existence cannot be inferred solely from the essence of existing things, Avicenna concluded that existence must be imparted. It must be given or added by an external agent cause.
And that move fundamentally shifts the focus of philosophy.
It does. It shifts it from classifying what things are,
Yeah.
essence, to determining why they are, existence.
Okay, let's slow down and systematize this for you, the listener.
Yeah,
He structured all of reality based on these modalities of being, right?
that's right. Avicenna posited three modalities that categorize everything that can or cannot exist. First, you have impossibility, that which cannot exist without an inherent contradiction, like a square circle. That's straightforward.
And then we have our world, the world of contingency.
That is contingency, mumkin. This covers everything in the material world. A contingent being is something that has the potential to be or not to be. It doesn't contain the necessity of its own existence within its essence.
The building you were in, you, me, we're all contingent.
All contingent. And when a contingent being is actualized by some external agent, it's referred to as a necessary existent due to what is other than itself.
This sounds exactly like the political instability he faced. Everything is temporary, dependent on something else. And that leads to the third category, the ultimate certainty.
That is the necessary being due to itself. Wajib al-wujud bidatihi. This entity is unique. Its existence is self-contained and derived from its own essence. It is its existence. It has no cause, no beginning, and no end.
It must exist.
It must exist. And he defined this necessary being with astonishing philosophical rigor, essentially stripping it of any anthropomorphic or material traits. It has no genus, no definition, no counterpart. Crucially, it is detached from all physical characteristics, matter, quality, quantity, place, situation, or time.
And he argued it must be one.
It must be one. If there were two necessary beings, they would require some difference to distinguish them, and if they require a difference, they must be composed of parts, which would contradict the concept of them existing due to themselves. It's a perfect logical circle.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Once he had established this concept of the necessary being through pure logic, Avicenna formalized his argument for God's existence.
The proof of the truthful, or Buran al-Legiquin.
And the profound power of this proof is that it's purely ontological.
Meaning it argues from the very concept of being, rather than relying on cosmological arguments like movement or design that had been popular before. He argued that we cannot conceive of the world without acknowledging that existence itself is either necessary or contingent.
And since the entire chain of contingent beings requires a point of origin,
Something that is not contingent.
there must exist an entity whose non-existence is inconceivable.
He used pure rational deduction to prove an entity that simply cannot not exist, and then identified this unique necessary being with God in Islam.
And this radical a priori proof, it's been called the most influential medieval argument for God's existence.
It is. It defined the trajectory of Islamic theology and profoundly shaped the intellectual landscape of Western scholasticism.
But his genius wasn't limited to proving God's existence. It extended to proving the existence and nature of the self. Which brings us to the famous thought experiment, the floating man.
Yes, this experiment, which he developed while he was imprisoned in the castle of Fardajan, was designed to prove the substantiality and immateriality of the soul, or the self, independent of the body.
Lay out the scenario in detail, because this is the perfect moment for you to grasp the concept of pure self-awareness.
Avicenna asks you to imagine that you are created instantaneously as a fully formed human adult, suspended in a complete void. No up, no down, no gravitational pull. Your eyes are obscured, so you cannot perceive light or external entities.
Because this is it all.
Your limbs are separated and fixed, so you have no sensory contact with the external world or even your own body parts. You cannot feel your heartbeat or the ground beneath your feet. You are completely cut off from all sensation.
The ultimate sensory deprivation, and the core question is, in this state, can you still be assured of the existence of yourself?
Avicenna's conclusion was a resounding yes. Even deprived of all external and internal sensory input, the person would still affirm, I am. They would have immediate, non-corporeal self-consciousness.
Which proves what exactly?
It proves that the self, or the soul, is a substance that is perceived intellectually and is therefore independent of the body, its organs, and its senses. It proves the soul's immaterial substance.
That is powerful, and it forces a complete reevaluation of how we acquire knowledge. If the soul is perceived intellectually, not physically, then we have an innate, non-material part of our being.
And that's why this experiment has such a profound affinity with René Descartes' Cogito argument. I think, therefore I am, even though Avicenna preceded him by centuries.
Right. Descartes used doubt to get to the certainty of thought.
And Avicenna used complete sensory deprivation to arrive at the certainty of self-substance. Both were fundamentally arguing that the mind, or the soul, is known immediately and independently of the transient physical world.
So Avicenna systematically dissected the nature of existence using pure reason. What happens when he turns that same laser focus onto the material contingent world, onto physics, cosmology, and geology?
He was instrumental in developing the very methodology used to study the material world. His insights are encapsulated in the Alberhan section of the Book of Healing, where he articulated an early, rigorous scientific method.
And his core philosophical question here was profoundly practical. How do we acquire the first principles, the reliable axioms of a science? How do we establish facts with certainty?
He began by directly critiquing the widely accepted Aristotelian method of induction, or istikra. Aristotle held that observing enough instances of a phenomenon allowed you to generalize a universal law.
And Avicenna found this insufficient. Why?
Because merely observing 100 or even 1,000 instances does not provide absolute, universal, and certain premises. Induction only provides high probability, not the certainty required for foundational science. What if the 1,001st instance contradicts the rule?
He recognized that induction is inherently prone to error.
And it does not yield demonstrative knowledge. So to achieve certainty, mere passive observation wasn't enough.
So what was his revolutionary alternative?
He developed and championed the rigorous method of examination and experimentation, or tajriba. He argued that you must actively manipulate conditions and test hypotheses systematically to establish those first principles. It involves controlled, repeated testing under varied circumstances.
Which allows the investigator to move past mere probability to arrive at universal certainty.
A concept that defines modern scientific inquiry.
Let's look at how he applied this thinking to the specific problem of motion in physics, which had been dominated by Aristotle's theories for centuries.
Right. In the Book of Healing, Avicenna directly confronted Aristotelian physics, particularly regarding projectile motion. Aristotle famously argued that motion only continues if something is perpetually pushing the object.
Or if the air displaced by the projectile rushes around to push it from behind. The theory of antiperistasis.
Exactly. Motion requires a constant external cause. Avicenna broke away from that millennia-old assumption by developing a detailed, innovative theory of motion centered on the concept of inclination, or male.
Male? What is that?
He argued that when a thrower releases a projectile, they transfer a certain quality or internal force called male into the object. This male is what sustains the motion, not the air.
So the object is carrying the force internally. What does that imply for motion in a vacuum?
Crucially, he concluded that if a projectile were thrown in a vacuum where there is no air resistance, its motion would not cease. He viewed male as a force that is permanent and self-sustaining, dissipated only by external resistance, like the friction of air or gravity.
That is functionally a conceptual precursor to the theory of impetus, which then led directly to the concept of inertia defined by Galileo and Newton.
He was grappling with the fundamental nature of inertia centuries before the modern era, and his scientific divergence from Greek orthodoxy continued in cosmology and astronomy.
He made a conscious choice to separate mathematical astronomy from astrology.
He did, which was a huge step. And he also challenged Aristotle's specific views on celestial bodies. Aristotle viewed the heavens as perfect spheres whose light was secondary. Avicenna argued against this, stating instead that the stars are inherently self-luminous.
And when it came to light itself, he was part of an emerging group of thinkers who argued for a finite speed.
His reasoning was elegant and rational. He suggested that, quote, if the perception of light is due to the emission of some sort of particles by a luminous source, the speed of light must be finite.
Which stood in sharp contrast to the earlier belief that light propagated instantaneously.
It did. He even claimed to have observed the transit of Venus. And while the exact date is debated by modern astronomers, Avicenna used this observation to support the conclusion that Venus must sometimes pass below the Sun in the geocentric model, confirming its sphere was closer to Earth.
A direct use of empirical data to refine or challenge existing models.
And he didn't just separate astronomy and astrology. He actively campaigned against the pseudoscience of his day. He wrote a systematic, dedicated attack on astrology, citing passages from the Quran to reinforce his argument.
Finally, we have to touch on his insights into geology and deep time, which are just shockingly modern.
His descriptions of mountain formation are incredible. He posited that mountains resulted from two primary natural causes. First, upheavals of the crust of the earth, triggered by violent earthquakes. And second, the effect of water, where rivers and floods cut new routes and carved valleys.
But the real genius here isn't just noting how they are formed, but grasping the timescale required.
That is the core insight that places him centuries ahead. He intuitively recognized geological time. He stated that for such changes to occur, quote, it would require a long period of time for all such changes to be accomplished.
He understood that geological processes unfold over incomprehensibly vast temporal scales.
Far ahead of most of his contemporaries.
Avicenna's intellectual output was so vast and so deeply synthesized that he managed to shape not only the rational sciences, but also the internal debates of religious disciplines in the Islamic world.
Robert Wisnowski, a prominent scholar, accurately called Avicenna the central figure in the long history of the rational sciences in Islam. His influence wasn't just in medicine or logic. His concepts and methodologies became the basis for rational theology and even informed jurisprudence.
Later thinkers like Al-Ghazali, who famously tried to refute Avicennism, only really demonstrated its philosophical dominance by dedicating their entire careers to attacking it.
That's a great point. And his standing in the West confirms his importance across cultures. We see this in Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy, where Avicenna is placed in limbo.
Alongside other virtuous non-Christian thinkers like Virgil, Homer, Plato, and Averroes.
And that placement was an explicit acknowledgement of his immense wisdom and moral authority, regardless of religious difference.
And in the medical sphere, the title he earned speaks volumes. Princeps Medicorum.
The Prince of Physicians. His synthesis of Galenic medicine, structured by the logical rigor of Aristotelian philosophy, made the canon unassailable. He truly professionalized medicine on an international scale.
We also have to recognize his significant contribution to language and literature. We know he was a talented poet, with nearly half of his surviving works versified in Arabic and Persian.
And his most important work, written in Persian, the Danish Name-i-Allah, Book of Knowledge for Allah, is linguistically monumental. He wrote it using a newly constructed scientific vocabulary for the Persian language.
He essentially formalized the terminology necessary to discuss complex, abstract concepts in Persian. That's foundational cultural work.
It is. It secured his place not just as a global scholar, but as a Persian literary and scientific icon. And perhaps the most concise encapsulation of his life's quest comes from those poignant Persian verses sometimes attributed to him.
From the depth of the black earth up to Saturn's apogee, all the problems of the universe have been solved by me.
I have escaped from the coils of snares and deceits. I have unraveled all knots except the knot of death.
The philosopher's realization that reason can conquer everything but mortality. His legacy remains incredibly strong today, recognized globally.
Absolutely. Buwali Sina University in Iran is named for him. UNESCO established the Avicenna Prize for Ethics and Science in 2003. Even the global directory that validates medical schools was originally launched as the Avicenna Directories.
And fittingly for a figure who advanced astronomy, a large lunar crater on the far side of the moon bears his name.
And of course, for those looking for a dramatic portrayal of his life, Avicenna was portrayed by Ben Kingsley in the 2013 film The Physician.
So we have completed a comprehensive deep dive into the life and mind of Avicenna. Think about the monumental breadth of his achievement, synthesizing medicine, logic, physics, and metaphysics into one cohesive system, all while navigating a relentlessly turbulent political life.
The defining theme of his life's work wasn't just accumulation of knowledge. It was his dedication to reconciling rational philosophy with Islamic revelation. His entire intellectual project, culminating in the proof of the Truthful, was aimed at demonstrating that the existence of God and the structure of creation could be proven rigorously, scientifically, and through pure reason.
And this leaves us with a truly provocative thought, one to mull over long after this deep dive is done. Avicenna was a man of faith who argued that the Islamic prophets should be considered superior to philosophers, whose knowledge is earned purely through struggle.
Right.
Yet, he used his most rigorous rational logic, the kind we saw in the elegant, stripped-down floating man thought experiment, to dissect and analyze the very nature of prophecy, treating it as a knowable intellectual phenomenon to be understood.
So considering his insistence on both pure, critical reason and the acceptance of inspired knowledge, what field of modern study, whether it's contemporary physical science, the complex dynamics of spirituality, or our globally polarized political philosophy, what field would gain the most from having a mind as synthetic, vast, and courageous as Avicenna's applied to it today?
He truly was, and remains, the leading master.